Welcome back for another deep dive.
Big
Today,
deal.
today we're looking at something that honestly kind of gives me the chills.
Oh,
It's malware. That's actually hijacking
really?
accessibility features in Windows.
Oh, wow.
I mean, who would have thought that feature's designed to help people
Yeah,
would be turned into weapons?
it is. It is pretty unsettling. And
Okay.
what's really fascinating is this malware. It's using the Windows UI automation framework.
Okay.
It's essentially turning it into an invisibility cloak to hide from security tools.
An invisibility cloak.
Yeah.
We've got a great cybersecurity blog post that breaks down how it all works.
No, maybe you can start by explaining what this Windows UI automation framework even is. I mean, I use Windows every day.
Yeah.
I have no idea what that is.
Right. It's basically a system that lets programs interact with the user interface of other applications. So think about assistive technologies, things like screen readers. For the visually impaired,
The UI automation framework
Mhm.
is what lets those programs read texts from the screen
Mhm.
and vocalize it.
Right.
Or it could be software that helps people with limited mobility control their mouse and keyboard.
So it's a pretty powerful system.
Yep.
And obviously, super important for accessibility.
Absolutely.
But how are attackers exploiting it?
Well, the malware is basically tricking the system into thinking. It's a legitimate assistive technology.
Oh.
It does this by registering something called a COM object.
Okay.
Imagine it's like creating a fake ID that gives the malware access to the system.
Yeah.
And with that fake ID, it forces the system to load this core component of the UI automation framework called UIAutomationCore.dll into the target application.
Okay, so it's using a fake ID to slip into the system.
Right.
What happens once it's in?
Then things get really interesting.
Yeah.
The malware can basically start controlling the user interface programmatically, meaning it can click buttons, enter text, navigate applications, all without you seeing anything happening on the screen.
And Ghost is controlling your computer. That's straight out of a horror movie.
Yeah, it's a pretty apt analogy.
Wow.
And there's this technique they're using called cached element access, which I find especially clever. It basically allows the malware to interact with elements that are stored in Titian's fills, meaning it can do things without causing any visible changes on the screen.
So you might be shopping online, entering your credit card details.
Yeah.
And this thing
Yeah.
is silently recording everything in the background. You wouldn't even know it's happening.
Exactly.
Wow.
It's essentially digital theft happening right under your nose.
Right.
And the article points out that this technique could be used to steal data from a whole range of applications. It's not just limited to things like online shopping.
Right.
Think about communication platforms like Slack or WhatsApp. Anything you type could be compromised.
So this is seriously scary stuff. And from what I'm reading, it seems like this malware is designed to evade traditional security measures like antivirus software and EDR tools. Why is that?
Well, the security solutions are generally looking for suspicious processes or files. In this case, the malware is operating within the context of a trusted system component. That UI automation framework we talked about.
Right.
It's like a wolf in sheep's clothing. It blends in so well with legitimate activities that most security tools just don't see it as a threat.
So it's exploiting the system's inherent trust to basically disappear into the background.
Right.
And the article also mentions this tool called EDR Silencer, which sounds pretty ominous.
Yeah.
What exactly does that do?
It's stunning. It's as unsettling as it sounds.
Okay.
EDR silencer essentially cripples security systems
Why?
by disrupting their ability to communicate. Think about it like this. EDR solutions usually rely on sending data back to their central monitoring systems to raise alerts. EDR silencer actively blocks those communication channels,
Wow.
essentially silencing the alarms.
So it's not just about stealing data. It's also about covering its tracks and making it even harder to detect and stop. That's just messed up.
It's a double whammy for sure. And that's why this particular malware is so dangerous. It's exploiting trusted system components, operating in stealth mode, and actively disabling security measures designed to catch it. It's a perfect storm of malicious ingenuity.
Wow. And this isn't just some theoretical threat, right? I mean, it sounds like this is already impacting businesses and organizations in the real world.
Absolutely. In fact, the article highlights that critical infrastructure sectors, areas like finance, healthcare, and government, are being hit particularly hard. I mean, it makes sense.
Right.
Those sectors handle massive amounts of sensitive data, making them prime targets for cyber criminals who are looking to either
make money.
or cause major disruptions.
And we all know the costs associated with ransomware attacks these days are astronomical. I read that. The average cost is now something like $1.85 million.
Wow.
And the potential for even bigger losses is terrifying.
It is a very real and costly threat. And you have to remember, those figures only account for the immediate costs of an attack. Things like downtime, recovery efforts, and ransom payments. But there are long-term consequences as well. The reputational damage, the loss of customer trust, the legal fees. Those costs can be even more significant.
Yeah, the Equifax breach comes to mind as a stark example of just how devastating these kinds of attacks
can be. Absolutely.
Millions of people had their personal information compromised.
Yeah, the Equifax breach was a watershed moment in cybersecurity. It exposed the vulnerabilities of even large, well-established companies. And the fallout was immense. It resulted in fines and penalties exceeding $1 billion, not to mention the class action lawsuits and the overall hit to their reputation.
So it's clear that this new malware technique is a real game changer in the world of cyber threats.
It is.
But is there any hope? Can we actually defend against something this sophisticated? The article did mention some defense strategies.
Yeah.
Maybe we can take a closer look at those after a quick...
Wait, hold on. Before we jump into solutions, let's talk about what makes these sectors, finance, healthcare, government, such attractive targets for this type of attack.
Oh, yeah. That's a good point. Why are they being hit so hard?
It boils down to a few key factors. First, they're often dealing with highly sensitive data. Think about financial records, patient health information, government secrets. This is the kind of stuff that cyber criminals drool over.
Right, because it's worth a lot on the dark web.
Exactly. It can be sold, traded, used for identity theft, blackmail, you name it. And these sectors are also often heavily reliant on legacy systems, which you might not have, the latest security features.
So they're kind of sitting ducks for these advanced attacks.
In a way, yes.
Wow.
And to make matters worse, they're often understaffed and under-resourced. When it comes to cybersecurity, they might not have the personnel or the budget to implement the kind of sophisticated defenses they need. So you combine those factors, valuable data, vulnerable systems, and limited resources, and it's a recipe for disaster.
I see what you mean. So it's not just about the technical capabilities of the malware itself. It's also about the context in which it's being used.
Precisely. That's why it's so important to understand not just the what of these attacks, but also the why.
The motivation behind them. Okay, so now that we have a better understanding of why these sectors are being targeted, let's talk about what we can actually do to defend against these attacks. I know the article had some recommendations.
The article dives into some practical steps organizations can take. One of the first recommendations is implementing stricter security policies, which might sound a bit dry, but it's actually really crucial.
Okay, but what are we talking about here? What kind of policies?
Well, for starters, they recommend implementing software restriction policies. It's about limiting where applications can run on your systems, which helps contain potential threats. Specifically, they talk about blocking program execution from the user's app data directory.
I guess that makes sense. Malware often tries to hide in those user directories, right?
Exactly. It's like setting boundaries within your computer to make it harder for malware to move around freely. And another important aspect is strong content security policies, or CSPs. Now, those might sound a bit technical, but think of them as a bouncer at a club.
Okay, I like that analogy. So the bouncer, or CSP, is deciding who gets in and who stays out.
Exactly. CSPs tell browsers what resources they're allowed to load and from where. This helps prevent malicious scripts from being injected into websites and running on your system. It's like a security checkpoint at the entrance to your browser.
So it's all about controlling what's allowed to run on your computer, both in terms of applications and websites.
Exactly.
That seems pretty straightforward.
And of course, we can't forget about the basics. Regular patching and system updates. I know this can be annoying, but they are absolutely essential for closing known vulnerabilities that attackers could exploit.
It's like locking the doors and windows
Yeah.
of your house.
Yeah.
It might seem like a hassle,
Yeah.
but it's worth it for the added security.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
The article also stresses the importance of network segmentation.
Okay.
Now imagine, you're dividing your network into smaller, isolated compartments.
Okay. I'm picturing it like those old castles.
Yeah.
With multiple layers of walls and moats.
That's a great visualization that way.
Yeah.
If one part of your network gets compromised, the damage is contained, and it doesn't spread to the entire network.
Oh, yeah.
It's like having firewalls within your network itself.
So it's about limiting the blast radius of an attack?
Exactly.
Right.
And then there's strong authentication, which is something we've all heard about.
Yeah.
But it's worth repeating.
Okay.
Using two-factor authentication adds that extra layer of security to user accounts,
Right.
making it much harder for attackers to gain access, even if they steal a password.
So even if someone gets their hands on your keys, they still need another piece of information
Yeah.
to get inside.
Right.
But the article also talks about the need for more advanced monitoring techniques. What did they suggest?
Well, one tool they mentioned that I found interesting is called Oscary.
Okay.
It's essentially a way to query your operating system like you would a database.
So instead of
Yeah.
just passively looking at logs,
Yeah.
you can actually ask specific questions.
Yeah.
That's what's happening.
On your system.
Exactly.
Right.
And in the context of this UI automation attack, you can use Oscary to track which processes are loading.
Yeah.
That UI automation core.dll file we talked about earlier,
Right.
it's a pretty clear sign that's something fishy. Might be
Yeah.
go on. So it's like having a detective inside your computer, constantly watching for suspicious activity.
A very proactive detective.
Right.
And another key monitoring technique is keeping a close eye on named pipes.
Okay.
Now, those might sound a bit technical.
Yeah, I'm not really familiar with those.
Think of them as communication channels that different processes use to talk to each other.
Okay.
The UI automation framework uses them extensively. So by monitoring those named pipes, you can see what kind of commands the UI automation framework is receiving, and potentially spot malicious ones.
It's like eavesdropping on
Yeah.
the conversations happening inside your computer.
That's a good way to think about it. And
Yeah.
then, of course, there are real-time threat intelligence feeds. These feeds provide up-to-the-minute information about new malware strains and attack techniques, helping security teams stay ahead of the curve.
It's like having a global network of spies sharing intel on the latest cyber criminal activity.
a very well-connected network of spies. The article also highlights the need for regular security scanning, especially for things like microservices and cloud services, which are often overlooked. Attack surfaces?
Okay.
It's like checking the locks on all the doors and windows, even the ones that are hidden in the basement.
And then there's this concept of a zero trust approach.
Ah, yes. Zero trust.
Yeah.
That's a security model where you assume that no user or device can be trusted by default, even if they're already inside your network.
Okay.
Everything needs to be verified and authorized.
It's kind of like constantly having to prove your identity, even when you're already inside the building.
Exactly. It's about eliminating implicit trust and continuously validating every access request.
It sounds intense, but I can see how that would be helpful, especially with these stealthy attacks that can slip past traditional defenses.
It's definitely a more rigorous approach to security.
Okay.
It's like having security checkpoints throughout your building, not just
at the front entrance.
And one last point I want to touch on from the article.
Go ahead.
It's something that often gets overlooked in all the talk about technology and tools.
Okay.
But it's absolutely crucial. The human element. No matter how sophisticated our security technology gets, employee awareness training remains one of the most important lines of defense.
That makes sense. Even with FATIN, the best security systems in place, a single click on a phishing link or a careless mistake can open the door to disaster. It's like having a state-of-the-art security system, but leaving your keys under the doormat.
That's a great analogy.
Yeah.
Humans are often the weakest link in the security chain. And attackers know this.
Right.
That's why social engineering tactics,
Right.
like phishing, are still so effective.
So what kind of training
Yeah.
is actually effective in preventing these kinds of attacks? I mean, we're talking about those boring PowerPoint presentations that everyone zones out during.
Hopefully not the article.
Yeah.
Really emphasizes the need for engaging, interactive training that's
Yeah.
relevant to people's daily work.
Wow.
The idea is to make it as real and relatable as possible.
So maybe something like simulated phishing attacks,
Yeah.
where you send out fake phishing emails
Yeah,
to test how many employees fall for them.
exactly. And then you provide immediate feedback and education to those who clicked on the link. That way, they learn from their mistakes in a safe environment and are less likely to make the same mistake in a real attack.
But like giving them
Yeah,
a taste of what a real attack might look like so they can be better prepared.
that's the idea.
Yeah.
And the article also mentioned something called micromodules,
Okay.
which are short, focused training bursts that cover
Yeah.
specific security topics.
Oh, so instead of those
Okay.
long, drawn-out training sessions, you break it down to
Really?
smaller, more digestible chunks.
Exactly. They're easier to fit into people's busy schedules, and they can be tailored to different roles and responsibilities within the organization.
Right, because not everyone needs to be
Yeah.
a cybersecurity expert,
Yeah.
but everyone needs to understand the basics and how their actions can impact security.
Exactly.
Yeah.
It's not enough to just do training once a year and call it a day. Security awareness needs to be an ongoing effort with
Right.
regular refreshers and updates.
It's like a muscle. You
It's-
need to keep exercising. You can't just go to the gym once and expect to be
Yeah.
fit forever.
That's a great analogy.
Right.
And it's also important to measure the effectiveness
Yeah.
of your training program.
Yeah.
You can do that by tracking things like phishing click rates, how often employees report suspicious activity and conduct, post-training assessments to see how well people are retaining the information.
So it's about constantly evaluating and refining your training program
Okay.
to make sure it's actually working.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Security awareness is a journey, not a destination.
Okay, so we've covered a lot of ground here. We've talked about how this malware works, why certain sectors are being targeted, and a whole range of defense strategies, from technical controls to employee awareness training.
Right.
It's a lot to take in.
Yeah.
But what do you think are the most important takeaways for our listeners today?
That's a
Yeah.
good question, I
Yeah.
think. The biggest takeaway is that security is a multi-layered problem, and it requires a multi-layered approach.
Right.
There's no silver bullet, no single solution that will protect you from everything.
That's interesting.
It's about combining different strategies and tactics to create a comprehensive defense.
So it's about building a fortress with strong walls, vigilant guards, and well-trained inhabitants.
That's a great way to put it.
Yeah.
And another important point is that security is a shared responsibility.
Yep.
It's not just the IT department's job.
Right.
It's something that everyone in an organization needs to be aware of and actively participate in.
We all have a role to play in
Yeah.
protecting ourselves
Yeah.
and our organization.
Exactly. And lastly, I would say that security is an ongoing process. The threat landscape is constantly changing. So we need to be constantly learning, adapting, and evolving our defenses to stay ahead of the curve.
It's a marathon,
Yeah.
not a sprint,
Yeah.
but this deep dive has been incredibly insightful. We've learned so much about a sophisticated new malware technique that's exploiting accessibility features in Windows.
Yeah.
It's pretty unsettling to think about how something
Yeah.
designed to help people can be turned into a weapon.
It's definitely a sobering reminder
Yeah.
that attackers are always looking for new and creative ways to exploit weaknesses
Yeah.
in our system.
But it underscores the importance
Yeah.
of staying informed, staying vigilant,
Yeah.
and constantly improving our defenses.
It's a constant cat and mouse game, that's for sure.
Yeah.
But the good news is that we're not powerless.
Yeah.
There are steps we can take, both as individuals and as organizations, to protect ourselves.
You mentioned earlier
Yeah.
that the article also dives into defense strategies, and I'm curious to learn more about that. What kind of things can we actually do to protect ourselves from this type of malware?
Well, the article lays out a multi-layered approach, which I think is key.
Okay.
It's not about relying on one single solution, but rather creating a series of overlapping defenses.
So it's like having
Yeah.
multiple layers of security. So even if one layer is breached, the others can still hold the fort.
That's a great way to think about it.
Okay.
And as we discussed earlier, stricter security policies are a good place to start. Things like software restriction policies, strong content security policies, regular patching, and network segmentation can significantly reduce your attack surface.
Right, so making it harder for malware to gain a foothold in the first place.
Right.
But what about once it's already inside? I mean,
Yeah.
we talked about how this malware is designed to evade traditional security tools.
What? Advanced monitoring techniques come in. Remember those tools we discussed earlier? Oscary and named pipe monitoring. Those can be really effective for detecting this type of attack, even if it's trying to hide in plain sight.
So it's like having the security camera that can see through the malware's invisibility cloak.
It's a good analogy.
Right.
And of course, real-time threat intelligence is crucial. It's like having a network of informants who are constantly tipping you off about the latest criminal activity.
So you can stay one step ahead of the bad guys.
Exactly.
And then there's something that's often overlooked, but it's absolutely crucial, the human element.
Yes.
Right. We talked about employee awareness training. That seems like a no-brainer, but I'm guessing there's more to it than there's more to it than just showing people. A PowerPoint presentation once a year.
Absolutely. The article emphasizes that training needs to be engaging, interactive, and relevant to people's daily work. Think about simulations like those fake phishing emails you mentioned earlier.
Yeah, I think those are a great way to get people thinking about the threats in a more realistic way.
Right. And there are other approaches too, like micromodules, which are short, focused training bursts that cover specific security topics.
So it's about breaking down the training into smaller, more digestible chunks.
Exactly. And it's also important to tailor the training to different roles and responsibilities within the organization.
Right, because not everyone needs to be a cybersecurity expert.
Yeah, exactly.
But everyone needs to understand the basics and how their actions can impact security.
Right.
So it's about creating a culture of security awareness where everyone feels empowered to
take ownership
of their own security,
the security
of the organization.
Exactly.
And it sounds like it's an ongoing process. You can't just do training once and then forget about it.
Absolutely. Security awareness is a journey, not a destination.
Okay, so what's the key takeaway? For our listeners today, I mean, we've covered a lot of ground. From the technical details of this malware to the broader implications for cybersecurity. What's the one thing you want people to remember?
I think the most important message is that we can't afford to be complacent. This malware, that exploits accessibility features. It's a wake-up call. Yeah. It shows that. Attackers are constantly evolving their tactics, and they're not afraid to target even the most trusted systems.
But we need to be constantly
on our guard.
Exactly. Okay. We need to be proactive, not reactive. We need to anticipate threats, plan for the worst-case scenarios, and constantly improve our defenses. And it's not just about technology. It's about people, processes, and culture.
So it's about building a security mindset where everyone is aware of the risks and takes responsibility for protecting themselves and the organization.
That's a great way to put it. And I would add that it's important to stay informed. The cybersecurity landscape is constantly changing. So keep up with the latest news, threats, and best practices.
Excellent advice. Well, this deep dive has been fascinating, if a little unsettling. It's amazing how something designed to help people can be twisted and used for malicious purposes. It is. It is a reminder that the line between good and bad, between helpful and harmful, can be incredibly thin in the digital world, but it's also a testament to human ingenuity, just as attackers are finding new ways to exploit technology. Defenders are finding new ways to protect it.
It's a constant battle.
Yes.
But it's one that we can win if we work together and stay vigilant.
Absolutely.
Well, this has been an eye-opening conversation.
Yeah.
I know. I've learned a lot, and I hope our listeners have too.
Me too.
Thanks for joining us on this deep dive. And remember, stay safe out there in the digital world.
Stay safe.